stand so tall, carrying dreams of freedom upon a call. With every heartbeat they march for miles, armed with courage, facing trials. In their eyes a story untold. Together we'll rise through the storms and the fight. With hearts intertwined, we'll shine our light. In the melody of freedom, let our voices blend. Each note a promise, a love that won't end.
And speaking of seemingly impossible military victories, let's talk about Operation Fenkil, a battle that changed the course of African history, yet somehow gets less attention than my attempts to grow a decent mustache in the 90s. Picture, if you will, February 1990. While Americans were busy watching Home Alone in theaters and wondering if those paint cans to the face would actually kill someone, something extraordinary was happening in Eritrea. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front was about to pull off what military experts would later describe as their Dien Bien Phu moment, which, no, is not a fancy Vietnamese dessert. Now, before we dive deeper into this remarkable operation, we need to understand just how David and Goliath this situation really was. Imagine if Luxembourg decided to take on the entire European Union, while the EU was being backed by both NASA and SpaceX. That's roughly the scale of disadvantage we're talking about here. The Ethiopian military at the time was Africa's largest army. They had Soviet military advisors, American-supplied weapons, and enough firepower to make a Michael Bay movie look like a quiet afternoon at the library. Meanwhile, the EPLF was working with whatever they could get their hands on, like a student trying to cook dinner with whatever's left in the fridge 2 weeks before payday. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, why are you telling us about a battle from 30 years ago in a country that some people still confuse with Estonia? Well, because this is arguably one of the most impressive military operations you've never heard of. Imagine if David not only beat Goliath, but did it while coordinating 3 different types of forces with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker who's had way too much coffee. Let's talk about Massawa for a moment. This wasn't just any port city. This was the jewel of the Red Sea, a strategic masterpiece that would make risk players weep with envy. Controlling Massawa was like controlling the world's only Wi-Fi router during a teenager's birthday party. Absolutely crucial. The EPLF, fighting against Ethiopia's Soviet-backed Derg regime, which, by the way, was about as friendly as a shark wearing brass knuckles, decided to take on this vital port city. And when I say the Derg regime was unfriendly, I'm putting it mildly. These were the same people who thought the best way to deal with opposition was to create something called the Red Terror, which surprisingly wasn't a spicy Ethiopian dish, but rather a campaign of systematic repression that would make George Orwell say, "Steady on, that's a bit much." But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely bonkers. The EPLF didn't just send in troops, they orchestrated what can only be described as a military symphony. Infantry, mechanized units, and naval forces all working together with the kind of coordination you wish your family had during Thanksgiving dinner. The planning of Operation Fenkil was so meticulous, it would make Marie Kondo look disorganized. They had to coordinate attacks from the sea, land, and mechanized units, all while maintaining radio silence to preserve the element of surprise. It's like trying to organize a surprise party where some guests are arriving by helicopter, others by submarine, and a few are coming on unicycles, and nobody can use their phones to communicate. What's particularly fascinating is how they managed to keep this massive operation under wraps. The Ethiopian forces had surveillance equipment that would have made James Bond jealous, yet somehow the EPLF managed to move entire battalions into position without being detected. It's like successfully sneaking an elephant into a swimming pool during a pool party. Technically possible, but the logistics are mind-boggling. The actual battle began on February 8, 1990, and lasted 3 days, which, coincidentally, is also how long it takes to explain the plot of Inception to your grandparents. The EPLF forces struck from multiple directions with the kind of timing usually reserved for Olympic synchronized swimming teams. The Ethiopian forces, despite their superior numbers and equipment, found themselves in a situation similar to when you're playing chess against someone who's thinking 10 moves ahead while you're still trying to remember how the horse piece moves. They were completely outmaneuvered, outthought, and ultimately, outfought. This wasn't just remarkable because it worked. It was remarkable because it had never been done before in Eritrea's independence war. It would be like if I suddenly revealed I could juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle, surprising, impressive, and mildly terrifying all at once. And let's put this in perspective. This wasn't just some small skirmish. This was coming off the heels of their victory at Alphabet in 1988, which British historian Basil Davidson compared to Vietnam's victory at Dien Bien Phu. And if you're wondering how significant that is, Dien Bien Phu was the battle that convinced France to pack up its baguettes and go home. It was that decisive. The victory at Massawa wasn't just about capturing a port. It was about sending a message. A message that said, we're not just freedom fighters. We're innovative military strategists who can coordinate complex operations while probably also making excellent coffee. Because let's be honest, you don't pull off something like Operation Fenkil without some serious caffeine involvement. But what makes Operation Fenkil truly remarkable isn't just the military achievement, it's what it represented. Here was a small nation fighting against a Soviet-backed regime that was receiving support from both East and West. Yes, in one of those rare Cold War moments where both sides basically said, you know what, let's both be on the wrong side of history here. The operation effectively cut off Ethiopia's maritime access, essentially giving their supply lines the equivalent of a digital detox, complete and total disconnection. It was like changing the Wi-Fi password on your entire military operation. The Ethiopian army, which had been receiving weapons and supplies through this port, suddenly found itself in the equivalent of a military food desert. The psychological impact was enormous. Imagine if someone not only beat you at your favorite video game, but did it using a controller with missing buttons while blindfolded. That's the kind of demoralizing defeat we're talking about here. The Ethiopian military's aura of invincibility wasn't just dented, it was crushed like a soda can in a hydraulic press video. And here's the truly incredible part. This operation wasn't just about taking a strategic position. It was about showing that determination and coordination could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. It's like if your local community theater decided to take on Broadway and somehow ended up winning a Tony Award, except with significantly more geopolitical implications and, presumably, fewer musical numbers. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. The loss of Massawa was essentially the beginning of the end for Ethiopia's control over Eritrea. It's like they were playing a game of Jenga, and the EPLF just pulled out the most crucial piece. The whole thing was bound to come tumbling down. Today, Operation Fenkil is commemorated annually in Eritrea, and for good reason. It stands as a testament to what can be achieved when determination meets opportunity, when planning meets execution, and when a small force decides it's had quite enough of being pushed around. Thank you very much. But perhaps the most important lesson from Operation Fenkil isn't about military strategy or tactical brilliance, though there was plenty of that. It's about the power of collective will. As the saying goes, the collective will of a small nation is indomitable in the face of aggression and injustice. Which, let's be honest, sounds like something you'd find on a motivational poster in a UN break room, but in this case, it actually proved true. So next time someone tells you something's impossible, remember Operation Fenkil. Remember how a small force of freedom fighters coordinated a three-pronged attack with the precision of a synchronized swimming team, took on a superior force, and won. Remember how they changed the course of their nation's history in just 3 days, which, coincidentally, is also how long it takes me to decide what to watch on Netflix. Because in the end, Operation Fenkil wasn't just a military victory, it was a statement that said we're here, we're determined, and we're not going anywhere. Well, technically, they were going somewhere. They were going to liberation. And they got there, one precisely coordinated step at a time. And that's what makes this story so remarkable. It's not just about winning a battle, it's about proving that sometimes, just sometimes, David really can beat Goliath, especially if David has excellent military coordination and the element of surprise. And isn't that something worth remembering? Even if you still occasionally confuse Eritrea with Estonia.